All right. It's 11:25 p.m. and I have just finished up my daily podcast of the day. That involves reading. Sometimes those things kind of random. And tonight I read something that I wanted to put in a real episode of this podcast because it's important and it's going to help you be a better podcaster. That's what this podcast is about. This podcast, by the way, Build a Big Podcast, all about growing your podcast, making a better podcast, making a podcast that people care about, making a podcast that makes you money. My name is David Hooper, bigpodcast.com. That is the website. A quick side note, one of the things that I'm doing this month is trying new ways of recording this podcast. So I am in my office, not the normal studio. I'm talking into a Shure SM58 mic. It is going into a Vocaster One interface. So $160 worth of equipment. And I'm recording on Adobe Audition, which I do not normally do. I'm normally an Audacity guy and still am an Audacity guy. But I think it's important to move things around, keep your skills up. Some people want to use Audition. So here I am working with Audition. A few months ago, I got an app called Balance, and you may have seen ads for it. I think they found me on Instagram. Hey, it's Mental Health Month. Get a free year of this app, Balance. It's a guided meditation app. I was skeptical of guided meditations, but I downloaded it because it is free. I have found it unbelievably helpful. If you are interested in getting this app for a year for free, and this is not a sponsorship, they're not paying me to say this. This is as one user to maybe somebody that would find this helpful. Reach out to me via Blue Sky. My name there, David Hooper. There's also a Big Podcast account, bigpodcast.com. Anyway, I'm on their email list. I've got my daily podcast. And the daily podcast, just a practice podcast. I do not promote it. It's me reading. It is me improvising. It is me thinking on my feet, answering random questions, talking in a linear way, beginning, a middle, and an end. I call it the Sausage Factory Podcast. You can read up about it. If you go to bigpodcast.com, search the blog for Sausage Factory. I will give you the formula for that. Reading on the daily episode today, I thought I will read some of the spam I've gotten, some of the messages from Taco Bell telling me the latest tacos they've got. They send me a lot of stuff, man. I don't know how I got on that list. And Balance sends me something called Balance Weekly. It's got some good stuff in it. And that's what I'm going to read to you now and have a discussion, because some of this stuff I think is going to help you be a better podcaster, especially in the new year. If you're like me, you're thinking, what did I do this year that I don't want to do next year? Or what didn't I do this year that I do want to do next year? How can I have a better podcast and do the stuff that I'm talking about? Having a podcast that people care about, having a podcast that makes you money, having a podcast that makes impact. So they sent me this Balance Weekly, and the message says this. It says, the holidays have a way of turning from festive to frantic. Between shopping marathons, endless planning, and one too many cookie swaps, it's easy to feel like you're running on empty. That's why this week we're sharing ways to slow down. You can probably relate to this as a podcaster. Sometimes you're running multiple interviews in one day. Maybe you've got a deadline. You've got to get the edit out. The sound doesn't sound good. Guest on a remote interview doesn't show up with headphones or a good microphone. Well, that can be stressful. So this is the tip. And this is what I want to talk a little bit more about on this episode. Only say yes to events that bring you joy. Again, we're the holiday season. This is not an email for podcasters. It's an email for all of us. And it's good advice. Have you ever attended a holiday gathering and thought, I should have stayed home? Protecting your time and energy lets you focus on the moments and traditions that matter most, keeping the season feeling festive. That translates to your podcast. Only say yes to guests that you want to interview. Only say yes to guests who are going to bring value to your audience, to guests who are going to energize you when you show up to do the interview. How many times have we said, well, I'll take a punt on it. It's in a week or two. Don't have to think about it. It might be good. And then the day comes around where you've got to interview. Oh boy, I got to do this interview. Not really excited about it. That's not fair to you. That's not fair to the guest. With that said, there's certainly been times when I've been pleasantly surprised with a guest. Didn't expect much. Got in there. I thought, wow, this is amazing. And just the opposite of that. There's been more than a few guests I've interviewed. I'm really excited. It's mediocre. And that's going to happen to you. When you do dozens and dozens or hundreds and hundreds of interviews, which is what I've done, you're not going to hit all of them out of the park. But still, if you know that something isn't going to work out, you don't have a good feeling about it, you don't think the person is reputable, you think the person is going to try to take advantage of your audience, you don't have to say yes, find another guest, learn how to monologue. This is one of the big reasons that over the last few months, you've heard me really push Monologue podcast. The biggest is that you don't get caught with your pants down when you need to get an interview out. You're not going to be dependent on having somebody else share the mic with you, schedule that, and make them sound good, get them edited. The other is, and this is a secondary reason, but arguably equally as important. I'll be talking about this in the newsletter this week, newsletter.bigpodcast.com if you want to get that. People are burnt out on interviews. If you are an expert or an authority, people want to hear from you. Why are you giving all your airtime, all your momentum, the relationship that you have with people who are listening to you? You're the one thing consistent about your podcast, to somebody else. Why are you giving them that? Only say yes to guests that bring you joy. As I mentioned, balance. They call it a guided meditation app. It really is worth downloading, I think, just to hear the guy who does the voiceover. Amazing. It's an incredible voice. He's good at bringing you as a listener in and making you feel like he knows you. Hello, friend. Thanks for joining me again. I don't know how they do it. I guess they know that you've not been there for a while, or you were there earlier that day, or you're there later in the day. Good evening, this kind of thing. It's a custom, just for that moment, just for you, guided meditation. So it's very clever how they do it. Again, if you want to see it, I got a year subscription for you. It is free. I'm not getting a thing for it. I think it's a cool app. This is their marketing thing. They have friends telling friends about this app. And you and I, yeah, we're friends, man. So reach out to me via Blue Sky. Happy to send this to you. What this app does, and this is the next piece of advice, it says, if your spirits are a little less than bright, take a moment for yourself with our holiday stress single. And that's a single meditation as opposed to a program that this app can run you through. But taking a moment for yourself, that's the second thing I want to talk about on this episode. We are in a holiday season. When I was in the music industry, just about the whole industry shut down from Thanksgiving to about the second week of the new year. Everything was in place. Once we got through Black Friday, boom, we're out. Tours come off the road. People have a break. They get to spend time with their families. The big launches have been done. Everybody wanted to get them out before the holiday season. There won't be any big launches for a few weeks because everybody's busy with the holidays. Same for your listeners. If you need to take a break, this is a great time to do it. Or if you're like me, you think, well, I'm kind of taking a break, and listeners are going to take a break, and we're in a different mood. We're in this holiday festive mood. Everybody's kind of laid back. They've got listeners that are alone. They're traveling. They've got downtime they need to fill, or they've got voids in their lives where maybe they don't have a family to hang out with. Maybe the thing to do is do more episodes for them. Either way, you're not going to lose. I talked about having guests and switching to monologues. That's a way that you can change things up. What I'm saying here is if you want to take a moment for yourself, you can. If you want to be in the moment with your listeners as they're having that downtime, be in the moment with your listeners. They will allow you to do that. Balance, they send me this weekly email. I don't always open it, but I did open a couple tonight just to read. Maybe I'm just in the podcasting mood because I'm thinking, oh man, that's great advice for podcasters. Here's the one that they most recently sent me. 1 step forward, 2 steps back. Frustrating, right? Progress isn't always a straight line, and setbacks are a part of the process, just like podcasting. As we finish out the year, and I'm going to make some assumptions. I'm going to assume that if you are listening to me, you've been at this a while. I'm not necessarily somebody that beginning podcasters listen to because I don't talk about plugging in a mic or some of the tech elements of podcasting. I'm more about more advanced stuff. This is really thinking out your content, thinking out your audience, thinking out the relationship you want to have with those people, and building a business around your podcast. So again, I'm going to assume that you've been at this a while. When we are in the trenches, a daily podcast, a weekly podcast, bi-weekly, every couple of weeks, maybe less often than that. It is difficult for us to see that we are improving in our monologuing, in our listening, in our empathy, in the questions that we ask people. So as we finish up this year and you're thinking toward the new year, I encourage you to take a moment. What would the Balance app do? Tell you to take a moment. Go back 6 months ago. Go back a year ago. Listen to how far you've come. You are getting better. You are showing up. And if you don't think so, take a moment to appreciate the fact that you did show up. Maybe you didn't do 52 great episodes this year, but you did 52 episodes. That's showing up once a week. Maybe you did 12 episodes, 24 episodes, whatever. You showed up. You want to increase it, do more of it next year? Maybe you're working too hard. You want to take your foot off the gas, concentrate on something else other than frequency and quantity. You can do that. Like this thing I just read, that's part of the process. Progress is not always a straight line, and setbacks and changes, because people change and plans change, that is part of the process. I'm thankful for you for spending this year with me, or maybe just this episode. How about both? I appreciate you. I'm moving into 20 years of podcasting, and that is very exciting to me. I'm still as excited about it as I've ever been, probably more excited. The fact that I can talk into a $99 mic, Focusrite Vocaster One, $59, and I can sound like $1 million. Amazing. It was not that way. It was not that way for me in the beginning. And speaking of the beginning, I'm going to end this episode with a story very related to what I was just talking about going back and listening to your old tape. I did not have a studio in my house when I started podcasting. The podcast that I was doing was actually a radio show that we released via podcast. So you could argue technically a radio show, but same kind of format as a lot of podcasts, 54 minutes of an interview. And I remember cutting some promos, and I'm in there with an engineer who was also a very established radio guy. I'm in there with my producer. He's giving me feedback. They're giving me copy to read. Engineer, kind of frustrated. I didn't really know him that well. We'd worked a little bit together, a few weeks, not like the 20 years that we've worked together now. So I really know him, and I'm comfortable with him, and he's comfortable with me. But I'm in a small booth with him, in a small booth with the producer. Same deal. We'd worked together a few weeks, few months maybe. And I'm cutting these promos, and I'm flubbing them, fumbling over them, blah, 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 not sounding really good. Not how I wanted to. I wanted to sound like the guy that was engineering me. He was also a jock, sounded amazing. Anyway, I'm in the studio again this week, in my home studio, tricked out closet. It's 5x8, nothing fancy. Had an electrician come wire it up, put a bunch of padding in it, Rockwell sound absorption panels, got some nice mics, the same mic I would use in the radio station. Not the one I'm talking to now, but an RE20, one of the two mics that you're going to see in a radio station. So good stuff in my home studio. Had to cut some promo material because we've got a new sponsor, Sweetwater. I've got a show about the music business. You may be familiar with Sweetwater. They still do a lot of podcasters, but it's a music store. And they came on as a sponsor. Engineer Stephanie calls me up. She says, "Hey, can you cut this today?" I said, "Sure." Sends it over to me. Boom. Knocked it out. And I have those moments every few months when we get a new sponsor, or we're doing promos, or we're doing affiliate line or something like that, where I think back to that first time with Engineer Dan, producer Gary, and I was so nervous, flubbing things, blah, 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 blah. I don't know how I'm going to do this. And I was having to prep like crazy for shows. Like I said, 45 minutes, we've got 4 segments. There's intros, there's outros. I was writing down everything. I was writing down all my questions. Start the clock, just try to hold on for 45 minutes. And now I do it with ease, not even thinking about it. And it's better. You will get better too if you keep showing up one foot in front of the other. Interestingly enough, I just looked up at the screen where I've got this Balance Weekly. It says this blog article shares simple ways to let go of future-focused stress and focus on what you can do right now. So what can you do right now? That's a good thing to leave you with. One of those things, if you're interested in working with me in the new year or right now, I've got something called Big Podcast AMP. It stands for Audio Monetization Program, AMP. Big Podcast AMP. And if you go to bigpodcast.com/AMP, AMP, you could find more information about it. If you have questions, as I've mentioned, I'm on Blue Sky. Feel free to reach out to me there, but do read the letter I've got for you at bigpodcast.com/AMP. If you're interested in taking your podcast and the business around your podcast and your podcasting talents to the next level in the new year, I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. And if you want to, we'll make something happen. All right. Thanks for listening to Build a Big Podcast. You can find more information about me at bigpodcast.com. You can subscribe. I talked about the newsletter. You can subscribe to the podcast. There's a lot of stuff to subscribe to. A lot of stuff that's going to help you to grow your podcast, get more people to your podcast, make a podcast that people care about, and make a podcast that in a year from now, you will be proud to have been a part of. Thanks for listening. I'll see you on bigpodcast.com. And very shortly, I'll see you on the next episode of this podcast, Build the Big Podcast. Have a great week.